Story number 1. The Cursed Ring. I've always been captivated by antiques, the stories they carry etched into every scratch and dent. So when I walked into Timeless Treasures, a quaint antique shop nestled in a quiet corner of town, couldn't resist. Amidst the assortment of relics, one piece stood out, a beautifully crafted silver ring, its surface intricately engraved with delicate patterns that hinted at a rich and mysterious past. The ring's center held a deep blue gemstone that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, drawing me in with its enigmatic allure. The shop owner, an elderly man with piercing blue eyes and a knowing smile, noticed my interest. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he remarked, gesturing towards the ring. "She's been here for quite some time." I nodded, captivated by the piece. "Do you know anything about her story?" He hesitated, a shadow crossing his face. "Legends say she's more than just a ring. Strange things happen to those who wear her." Intrigued and undeterred by his cryptic warning, I purchased the ring and brought it home that very evening. The moment it arrived, a sense of unease settled over me, but I dismissed it as mere imagination. After all, antiques were meant to evoke emotions, right? I decided to wear the ring on my left hand, the stone catching the light beautifully as I admired it in the mirror. Felt cool and heavy, perfect fit for my finger. The first night went by peacefully, filled with the usual sounds of settling into my new home. But as days turned into weeks, subtle disturbances began to emerge. It started with the ring running slightly hotter than usual, the gemstone pulsating softly under my skin. I dismissed it as a reaction to the material, assuming it needed some time to adjust. But soon, things escalated. Every time I wore the ring, I began experiencing vivid nightmares. In these dreams, I was pursued by a shadowy figure with hollow eyes and a haunting smile, his presence overwhelming and suffocating. I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unable to shake the lingering fear from my dreams. Outside of sleep, I felt an inexplicable sense of being watched. When walking alone at night, I often sensed a presence behind me, though when I turned around, there was no one there. The feeling grew more intense, a heavy weight pressing down on me, making it difficult to focus or relax. One particularly stormy night, as rain pelted against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, the haunting reached its peak. I sat in my living room, trying to ignore the unsettling sounds, when I felt a sudden surge of nausea and dizziness. The ring on my finger seemed to throb with a life of its own, the gemstone glowing ominously in the dim light. In a panic, I removed the ring, hoping to break the cycle of torment. But as I did, the room plunged into darkness, the power flickering and then dying entirely. The only light came from the lightning streaking across the sky outside, casting eerie shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. Suddenly, the room was filled with a cold, oppressive presence. I felt an invisible force pinning me to the spot, making it impossible to move. The shadows coalesced into the shape of a man, a ghostly apparition with hollow eyes and a sinister smile. He reached out towards me, his voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the room. "You cannot escape," he intoned, his voice filled with malice. "The ring binds you to us." Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled against the invisible force, my mind racing to comprehend the horror unfolding before me. "What do you want?" I cried out, my voice shaking with fear. The apparition's smile widened, and the room seemed to grow colder still. "We seek release," he declared. "Our stories remain untold, our suffering unacknowledged. Until our truth is revealed, our spirits cannot find peace." Desperate to free myself from the torment, I vowed to uncover the ring's history and the stories of those it bound. I spent countless nights researching, delving into old records and contacting local historians, piecing together the tragic tale of the ring's previous owners. What I discovered was a story of love, loss, and betrayal. The ring had belonged to Eleanor Hartley, a woman who had lost her family in a mysterious fire decades ago. Consumed by grief and unable to move on, Eleanor had fashioned the ring as a keepsake, a way to hold onto the memories of her lost loved ones. But her sorrow had twisted into something darker, binding the spirits of her family to the ring, trapping them in a perpetual cycle of pain and longing. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to confront the spirits and help them find the closure they so desperately sought. I returned to my home on a moonlit night, the storm having passed but the air still heavy with tension. I sat in my living room, the ring placed carefully on the table before me, and began to speak. Eleanor, I know your story. I understand your pain and your longing for peace. I'm here to help you and your family find the closure you need. The room grew colder, the air thick with anticipation. The apparition of Eleanor appeared before me, her eyes filled with sorrow and hope. You can help us, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. But you must remember our story. Tell it to the world. Only then can we be free. Determined to honor her plea, I organized a memorial event dedicated to Eleanor and her family. I shared their story with anyone who would listen, ensuring that their suffering and love were remembered. As I spoke, the atmosphere in my home began to change. The oppressive presence lifted, replaced by a serene calm that filled the room. On the final night of the memorial, I sat in the living room once more, the ring now lying harmlessly on the table. The air was warm and comforting, the shadows no longer menacing. I felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that I had helped Eleanor and her family find the release they so desperately needed. Driving away from my home, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the ring glimmering softly on the table, a silent testament to the power of remembering and honoring the stories of those who have passed. The nightmares ceased, and the feeling of being watched disappeared, replaced by a sense of fulfillment and tranquility. But even as life returned to normal, I couldn't shake the lingering feeling that the ring held more secrets, that its history was far from fully uncovered. And sometimes, when the night is still and the moon casts a gentle glow through my windows, I catch a glimpse of the ring's deep blue gemstone, a reminder of the spirits I helped find peace and the stories that must never be forgotten. Because in the end, it's not just about the haunted objects or the supernatural elements, it's about the human stories, the lingering emotions, and the capacity for redemption and closure that lies within us all. And as long as we remember and honor those who came before, their echoes will continue to resonate, guiding us toward understanding and peace. Story number 2. Timeless haunting. I've always been fascinated by antique clocks. There's something mesmerizing about the way they tick, a rhythmic reminder of time's relentless march forward. So when I stumbled upon an old 19th century clock at a local estate sale, couldn't resist. Its ornate wooden frame and intricate carvings spoke of a bygone era, and the promise of owning a piece of history was too tempting to pass up. The clock was a masterpiece, its pendulum swinging gracefully, the hands moving with precise elegance. The seller, an elderly gentleman with a twinkle in his eye, assured me that it was in perfect working condition. "It's a beautiful piece," he said, "perfect for your living room." I took it home that very afternoon, excited to place it in my newly renovated living room. The family had recently moved into a spacious house in the quiet suburbs of Connecticut, seeking a fresh start after years of turmoil. The house was filled with natural light, the large windows offering a panoramic view of the lush backyard. Setting up the clock felt like adding the final touch to our sanctuary. The first night went by peacefully, the gentle ticking of the clock blending harmoniously with the sounds of the evening. But as the days turned into weeks, subtle disturbances began to emerge. It started with the clock running slightly faster than usual, the pendulum swinging erratically. I dismissed it as a minor malfunction, assuming it needed winding or adjustment. But soon, things escalated. The clock continued to run normally during the day, its hands moving with unwavering precision. But at night, the disturbances grew more pronounced. I began hearing strange noises emanating from the living room, soft whispers, faint footsteps, and the occasional creak as if someone was pacing back and forth. One particularly stormy night, as rain pelted against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance. I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I approached the clock, the room dimly lit by the flickering light. The clock's face seemed to glow eerily in the darkness, its hands moving faster, the pendulum swinging wildly. I reached out to steady it, my fingers brushing against the cool wood. Instantly, a surge of cold energy shot through me, making me recoil in shock. The room grew colder, the temperature dropping drastically, and an oppressive silence filled the air. The clock's ticking slowed to a crawl before stopping entirely, the hands freezing at an arbitrary time. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, as if multiple voices were speaking simultaneously. "Help us! Remember us!" they echoed, their tones filled with sorrow and desperation. Heart pounding, I backed away, my mind racing to make sense of the inexplicable phenomena. The room felt heavy, the air thick with an unseen presence. I tried to shake off the fear, attributing it to the storm outside and my own imagination. But the feeling of being watched was undeniable. The next morning, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I researched the clock's history. I contacted antique experts and delved into old records. But information about the clock was scarce. The seller couldn't recall any specific details beyond its age and craftsmanship. Frustrated but undeterred, I continued my investigation, convinced that there was more to this clock than met the eye. Days turned into weeks, and the hauntings intensified. The clock's hands would sporadically stop and start, sometimes moving backward, distorting the passage of time within the house. Objects in the living room would shift positions overnight, and the whispers became a constant presence, growing louder and more urgent with each passing night. One evening, as I sat in the living room trying to ignore the unsettling sounds, the clock began to behave erratically once more. The pendulum swung wildly, the hands spinning out of control before abruptly halting. The room plunged into darkness as the power flickered and went out, the only light coming from the lightning streaking across the sky outside. In the pitch-black room, the whispers transformed into anguished cries, the voices overlapping in a cacophony of pain. I felt an invisible force pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. The shadows around me seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, closing in from all sides. Panic set in as I realized that the clock wasn't just a haunted object. It was a gateway, a conduit for restless spirits trapped within its time-worn frame. Desperate to escape, I tried to flee the room, but an invisible barrier held me in place. The cries grew louder, more desperate, as apparitions began to materialize around me. Ghostly figures of a family, their eyes hollow with eternal sorrow. A woman in a tattered dress reached out to me, her voice echoing with despair. "You must help us. Set us free." Tears welled up in my eyes as I grappled with the enormity of the situation. The clock, an innocent-looking antique, was the key to their imprisonment, and now I was entwined in their plight. Determined to find a solution, I sought the help of Lorraine Warren, a renowned paranormal investigator, and her husband Ed. Lorraine listened intently as I recounted the haunting events, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding of the supernatural forces at play. "This clock is not just haunted," she explained. "It's cursed. It holds the souls of a family who met a tragic end, their spirits bound to the object by unresolved trauma and grief. Together, we devised a plan to break the curse and release the trapped souls. We returned to my home with the necessary equipment, preparing for a confrontation with the dark forces within the clock. As midnight approached, the storm outside intensified, the house groaning under the weight of the tempest. We began the ritual, chanting ancient incantations and channeling positive energy into the room. The clock responded immediately, its hands spinning out of control, the pendulum swinging with frenetic energy. The room grew colder, the air thick with the presence of the trapped spirits. Suddenly, the apparitions reappeared, their forms wavering between the physical and the ethereal. The family, once again, stood around the clock, their expressions filled with a mix of hope and desperation. Lorraine reached out to them, her voice soothing and authoritative. "We're here to help you. You're not alone." The spirits hesitated, the tension in the room palpable. The woman in the tattered dress stepped forward, her eyes meeting Lorraine's with a flicker of recognition. "We were forgotten," she whispered, "our story untold. Release us." As we continued the ritual, the clock began to glow with a brilliant light, the shadows retreating as the spirits found the strength to move on. The room was filled with a sense of peace, the oppressive energy lifting as the souls were finally free to rest. With a final burst of light, the clock ceased its erratic behavior, the hands moving steadily once more, the pendulum swinging gracefully. The apparitions faded, their presence replaced by a serene calm that enveloped the room. The curse had been broken, the spirits liberated from their eternal torment. In the days that followed, the clock returned to its normal state, no longer a source of fear and dread. The disturbances ceased, and the house felt lighter, the atmosphere filled with a newfound sense of peace. I felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that I had played a part in helping the lost souls find their way to the afterlife. Reflecting on the experience, I realized that some objects carry more than just memories. They hold the essence of those who came before, their stories intertwined with the fabric of time. The clock, once a symbol of beauty and craftsmanship, had become a vessel for their lingering presence, a testament to the enduring power of unresolved emotions and the importance of remembering the past. And sometimes, when I glance at the clock in my living room, I'm reminded of the night I faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The steady ticking serves as a comforting reminder that time moves forward, and with it, the spirits of the past can find peace and rest. Because in the end, it's not just about the haunting or the supernatural, it's about the human stories, the lingering emotions, and the capacity for redemption and closure that lies within us all. And as long as we remember and honor those who came before, their echoes will continue to resonate, guiding us toward understanding and peace. Story number 3. Whispers Behind the Table. I've always been captivated by antiques, the stories they carry etched into every scratch and dent. So when I walked into Timeless Treasures, a quaint antique shop nestled in a quiet corner of town, couldn't resist. Amidst the assortment of relics, one piece stood out, a beautifully crafted wooden table, its surface intricately carved with delicate patterns that hinted at a rich and mysterious past. The shop owner, an elderly man with a knowing smile, offered it at a surprisingly low price. "Take it," he said, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "It has a story to tell." I laughed it off, dismissing it as just another sales pitch. Little did I know, that table would change my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Bringing the table home felt like bringing a piece of history into my own space. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the wood smooth and cool to the touch. I placed it in my dining room, envisioning it as the centerpiece for countless meals and gatherings. But from the moment it arrived, an unsettling presence began to seep into my home. The first night, as I sat down for dinner, I felt an immediate sense of unease. My stomach churned, and dizziness washed over me, but I shrugged it off as exhaustion from a long day. However, the feeling didn't go away. Over the next few weeks, strange things began to happen. Every time I sat at the table, the same sensations of nausea and dizziness returned. More intense each time, objects on the table would shift positions on their own. Cups would tilt without cause, and I often felt an invisible force pushing me away, making it impossible to sit comfortably. One evening, after a particularly unsettling experience, I decided to investigate the table's history. I contacted the antique shop, but the owner was no longer there. The shop had been closed for years. Frustrated, I turned to local archives, searching for any records related to the table. That's when I found it, a newspaper article from the 1950s detailing the tragic story of the Harper family. The Harpers were a happy family, known for their love of entertaining and fine dining. But tragedy struck one stormy night when a fire broke out in their home, claiming the lives of the entire family. The table I now owned was the centerpiece of their dining room, the last piece of furniture left untouched by the flames. Rumors swirled that the table had been the site of a heated argument before the fire, with unresolved anger and sorrow lingering in the air long after their deaths. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to confront the haunting head-on. I began documenting every occurrence, setting up cameras and voice recorders around the table, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural activity. The results were terrifying. Footage showed the table moving on its own, shadows dancing across the surface, and eerie whispers filling the room when no one was speaking. One night, as I sat alone at the table, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath became visible in the cold air, and the candles flickered violently. Suddenly, the surface of the table began to ripple like water, and the shadows formed into the shapes of people, ghostly apparitions of the Harper family. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions etched with pain and sorrow. "I can't leave," one of them whispered, his voice filled with despair. "We're trapped." I felt a surge of compassion, understanding that their unresolved emotions were binding their spirits to the table. "What can I do to help you?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear and empathy. "We need closure," another apparition replied, her voice echoing through the room. "Our story must be told, so we can finally rest." Determined to help them find peace, I vowed to share their story with the world. I wrote articles, shared their tale on social media, and even reached out to paranormal investigators to assist in documenting the hauntings. The response was overwhelming. People were fascinated by the haunted table, and the story of the Harpers began to spread. As more people became aware of the table's history, the hauntings began to subside. The apparitions grew less frequent, their presence fading as their stories were acknowledged and remembered. The final night I sat at the table was peaceful. The oppressive energy lifted, replaced by a serene calm. The spirits of the Harper family had found the closure they so desperately needed. Their torment finally over. Driving away from my home, I felt a profound sense of relief and fulfillment. The haunted table had not only changed my life but also brought peace to restless souls who had been trapped in their sorrow. But the experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the enduring power of compassion and the importance of remembering those who had been lost. And sometimes, when I pass by old antique shops or come across vintage furniture, I think of the Harper family and their haunted table. It's a testament to the idea that even in the darkest of places, there is hope for healing and peace, and that every object holds a story worth telling. Because in the end, it's not just about the hauntings or the supernatural elements, it's about the human stories, the unresolved emotions, and the capacity for redemption and closure that lies within us all. Story number 4. Echoes behind the frame. I've always been fascinated by art that whispers secrets from the past. Pieces that carry an undeniable presence, as if they breathe and pulse with their own life. So when I stumbled upon The Hands Resist Him at a quaint antique store in Connecticut, I couldn't resist its enigmatic allure. The painting, depicting a young boy and a doll standing before a wall adorned with ghostly hands, seemed to call out to me, its somber tones and eerie imagery impossible to ignore. The shop owner, an elderly man with piercing blue eyes, noticed my interest. "Beautiful, isn't she?" he remarked, gesturing towards the painting. "She's been here for quite some time." I nodded, captivated by the scene. "Do you know anything about her story?" He hesitated, a shadow crossing his face. "Legends say she's more than just a painting. Strange things happen to those who own her." Intrigued and undeterred by his cryptic warning, I purchased the painting and brought it home that very evening. The moment it arrived, a sense of unease settled over me, but I dismissed it as mere imagination. After all, Art was meant to evoke emotions, right? I decided to hang the painting in my living room, a place where I could admire it daily. As I stepped back to admire my work, the room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an unspoken tension. Shaking off the chill, I settled into my evening routine, unaware of the darkness about to unfold. That night, as I sat reading a book, I felt a presence in the room. Glancing up, I noticed the shadows around the painting seemed to deepen, the hands on the wall stretching and contorting unnaturally. I shook my head, blaming the late hour for my paranoia. But then, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, emanating from the painting itself. "Help us!" My heart raced as I stared at the canvas, the boy and the doll seemingly coming to life under my gaze. The room grew colder, my breath visible in the frigid air. I reached out tentatively, fingers brushing against the smooth frame, but pulled back as the temperature plummeted further. Days turned into weeks, and the disturbances only grew more intense. Objects in the room moved on their own, lights flickered without cause, and the whispers became more frequent and urgent. Every night, the presence became more palpable, the painting a focal point of unrelenting malevolence. Determined to uncover the truth behind the painting's haunting, I delved into its history. I contacted art historians, scoured old records, and even reached out to the shop owner, who now refused to speak of it. My research led me to a tragic tale from the early 20th century, a story of loss, betrayal, and restless spirits. The Hands Resist Him was painted by an obscure artist named Evelyn Hartley, who lost her family in a mysterious fire that consumed their home in 1912. Before the flames, Evelyn created this piece, depicting her son and daughter with protective hands reaching out from the walls. It was said that she believed the hands were guardian spirits, watching over her children even in death. But after the fire, rumors spread that the spirits had turned vengeful, trapping Evelyn's soul within the painting, forever seeking release for her lost family. Armed with this knowledge, I sought ways to communicate with the spirits, hoping to ease their torment. I set up a nightly ritual, lighting candles and speaking aloud, inviting their presence to find peace. The first few attempts yielded nothing, but on the seventh night, the room transformed, the painting shimmered, the figures within moving with a life of their own. Evelyn stood beside her children, her eyes hollow with sorrow. "We cannot rest," she cried, her voice echoing through the room. "Find the truth. Set us free." I felt a surge of determination, realizing that their suffering was tied to the unresolved tragedy of their past. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Evelyn reached out, her hand passing through the canvas as if it were air. "Reveal our story. Let the world remember our pain, so our spirits can finally find peace." Understanding the weight of her plea, I vowed to honor their memory. I organized an exhibition dedicated to Evelyn Hartley, showcasing her work and telling the tragic story of her family's demise. The event drew attention from both art enthusiasts and paranormal investigators, sparking a renewed interest in her life and the haunting of The Hands Resist Him. As the exhibition opened, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The painting no longer exuded the same oppressive energy, the shadows less menacing. During the final night of the exhibition, I stood before the painting, now a centerpiece surrounded by attentive visitors. The air felt lighter, the whispers silenced, replaced by a serene calm. Evelyn's figure appeared once more, her expression softening with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with relief. "You've set us free." With those final words, her presence faded, leaving behind a sense of peace that had eluded the painting for over a century. The exhibition concluded with a collective sense of closure, the spirits of Evelyn and her children finally able to move on. Driving away from the museum, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The painting, once a source of fear and torment, now stood as a testament to resilience and the power of remembrance. But even as I moved forward, The experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the restless spirits seeking peace. And sometimes, when I pass by the museum, I catch a glimpse of the painting through the window, its subjects now calm and serene, a silent reminder that some echoes from the past can finally find their resolution, bringing light to the darkest of stories, because in the heart of every haunted object lies a tale of love, loss, and the enduring spirit of those who refuse to be forgotten. And it's up to us to listen, remember, and help them find the peace they so desperately seek. Story number 5. Whispers from the Old Chair. I've always believed that our homes are more than just structures of wood and stone. They're repositories of memories, silent witnesses to our lives' triumphs and tragedies. So when my wife, Sarah, and I decided to move into our quaint, 3-bedroom house in the English countryside, we were eager to create new memories. Little did we know, our new home was about to gift us with something far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late autumn when we stumbled upon the antique shop nestled in a quiet corner of the village. The shop, Timeless Treasures, was a treasure trove of forgotten relics, each piece whispering stories of bygone eras. Sarah, an avid collector of vintage furniture, couldn't resist the allure of a beautifully carved Victorian chair displayed in the window. Its deep mahogany finish was immaculate, and the intricate designs etched into the wood hinted at craftsmanship long lost to time. "Look at this, Jack," she exclaimed, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Isn't it stunning?" I approached the chair, admiring its elegance. "It's perfect. Imagine this in our dining room. It would add so much character." The owner, an elderly gentleman with a kind face and a twinkle in his eye, noticed our interest. "Ah, you've got good taste," he said, smiling warmly. "That chair has quite the history, you know." "Really?" Sarah asked, her curiosity piqued. He nodded, his expression turning slightly somber. "It belonged to the Hargrave family. Tragic story. Really, you might want to hear it before you make a decision." Intrigued, we spent the next few minutes listening as he recounted the chair's past. The Hargraves were a loving family who had lived in our house decades ago. Their daughter, Emily, was the last to own the chair. One stormy night, Emily vanished without a trace, leaving the family shattered. The chair was believed to be the last piece of furniture she ever touched. And ever since her disappearance, strange occurrences plagued the Hargrave household. Sarah exchanged a glance with me. "I think it would still be beautiful in our home. Maybe it'll bring good memories." The owner seemed to hesitate for a moment before nodding. "Very well. Just be aware of its history." We left the shop with the chair carefully crated and transported to our house. The moment it arrived, a sense of unease settled over us. But we dismissed it as mere superstition. After all, we were rational people. Setting the chair in our dining room, we admired its beauty, unaware of the darkness it harbored. The first night was uneventful, filled with the usual sounds of settling into a new home. But as days turned into weeks, subtle disturbances began to emerge. First, it was just the chair creaking in the middle of the night. Despite the house being perfectly still, objects around the dining room moved ever so slightly, often going unnoticed amidst our busy lives. One evening, as Sarah and I sat down for dinner, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath became visible in the frigid air, and a chill settled over us. The candle flames flickered violently, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah reached for her glass, her hand trembling. "Did you feel that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, it's probably just the draft. This old house has a lot of them." But deep down, I knew it was something more. Over the next few weeks, the disturbances escalated. The chair would sometimes move to the center of the room on its own, leaning unnaturally forward as if beckoning us. Soft whispers echoed through the dining room, voices indistinct but filled with sorrow. Sarah claimed to see fleeting shadows out of the corner of her eye. always disappearing when she turned to look. One particularly stormy night, as thunder rumbled outside and rain lashed against the windows, the haunting reached its peak. We were gathered around the dining table, the chair ominously perched at the head seat. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness as the lights flickered and died. The candles cast eerie glows, shadows stretching and twisting in the dim light. A loud crash echoed through the house as the chair toppled backward. Landing with a thud, we rushed to its side, only to find it upright again, as if nothing had happened. The air grew thick with a heavy, oppressive presence, making it difficult to breathe. The whispers grew louder, clearer, filling the room with their mournful pleas. "Help us! Remember us!" Sarah clutched my arm, her face pale. "Jack, something's wrong. We need to get rid of this chair." I hesitated, a part of me wanting to believe that we could coexist with whatever spirit haunted the chair. But the fear in Sarah's eyes was unmistakable. "You're right. Let's take it back to the shop." But as we reached for the chair, it resisted. The wood seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and an unseen force pinned us in place. The temperature dropped further, our breaths shallow and rapid. Emily's apparition materialized before us, her translucent form weeping silently, eyes filled with eternal sadness. "Why are you taking me away?" she whispered, her voice echoing with anguish. "Don't leave me here." Desperate, I searched for a way to free ourselves, remembering the antique owner's warning. I tried to communicate. "Emily, we're sorry. We didn't know. We just wanted peace for our home." Her sorrowful gaze softened, and the oppressive presence began to lift. The chair settled back into its place, the room warming slightly. "Find the truth," she whispered, her form fading. "Remember us." We fled the house that night, the storm still raging outside but the house now silent. The next morning, we returned to the antique shop, the chair safely crated and ready to be taken away. The owner greeted us with a knowing look. "I see you've met Emily," he said quietly. "She's restless, bound by her tragic fate. The chair is a conduit for her spirit, unable to move on until her story is told, determined to help her find peace." I delved into the Hargrave family's history. I interviewed old neighbors, scoured newspaper archives, and pieced together the events leading up to Emily's disappearance. It turned out that Emily had been struggling with the loss of her parents, her grief isolating her from the rest of the world. On the night she vanished, it was the storm that finally broke her spirit, pushing her to seek solace in the very chair that now haunted our home. Armed with this knowledge, I organized a memorial service for Emily and the Hargrave family, inviting the local community to remember and honor their memory. We placed flowers around the chair, lit candles, and shared stories of Emily's life, her struggles, and her untimely end. As the sun set on the day of the memorial, a sense of peace settled over the house. The chair no longer emanated a dark presence. Instead, it seemed to radiate a gentle warmth. The whispers had ceased, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Emily's spirit had finally found the closure she needed, her sorrow lifted by the collective memory of those who remembered her. Driving away from the house, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. We had not only rid ourselves of the haunting but also helped a lost soul find peace. The antique shop became a place of reverence, the chair now a symbol of remembrance and the power of compassion. But even as I moved forward, the experience left an indelible mark on me. I realized that our homes are indeed repositories of memories, but they can also be battlegrounds where the living and the dead coexist, each seeking understanding and peace. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between the chaos, the whispers of the past remind us to honor those who came before, ensuring their stories are never forgotten. Because in the heart of every haunted object lies a tale of love, loss, and the enduring spirit of those who refuse to be forgotten. And it's up to us to listen, remember, and help them find the peace they so desperately seek. Story number 6. Reflections of the Damned. I've always been fascinated by objects steeped in dark history, relics that carry the weight of untold stories and lingering spirits. So when I heard about the old mirror housed in the Warrens Museum in Connecticut, my curiosity was instantly piqued. Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned paranormal investigators, had amassed a collection of the most haunted artifacts, each with its own chilling tale. The mirror, however, stood out among them, shrouded in an aura of malevolence that seemed to emanate even from photographs. The story behind the mirror was both tragic and terrifying. It had once belonged to the Harper family, a seemingly ordinary household that became anything but after they brought the mirror into their home. Strange occurrences began almost immediately: unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and a pervasive sense of dread that settled over the family. The youngest Harper, 8-year-old Emily, was particularly affected. She would often be found staring into the mirror for hours, her eyes vacant, whispering to unseen entities. The family, desperate and scared, reached out to the Warrens, who took the mirror away, promising to contain its darkness within their museum. Determined to uncover the truth behind the mirror's haunting, I arranged a visit to the Warrens Museum. As a freelance writer with a penchant for the supernatural, this was the perfect opportunity to delve into a story that could not only captivate my readers, but also satisfy my own insatiable curiosity. The museum itself was an imposing structure, its facade darkened by years of neglect, the windows opaque and uninviting. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine, an unexplainable sensation that something was watching me. I took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy wooden doors, stepping into the dimly lit interior. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and must, the halls lined with glass cases holding everything from ancient relics to cursed artifacts. My guide, a stern-faced curator named Mr. Langley, greeted me with a nod. "Welcome to the Warrens Museum. I understand you're here to learn about the mirror." "Yes," I replied, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. "I'm fascinated by its history and the phenomena associated with it." Mr. Langley led me through the labyrinthine corridors, past exhibits that seemed to hum with an unspoken energy. Finally, we arrived at a secluded wing of the museum, the door to which was slightly ajar. Inside, the room was dominated by a large, ornate mirror framed in dark, intricate woodwork. The glass was pristine, almost unnaturally so, reflecting the dim light in a way that made it seem almost alive. "This is the Harper mirror," Mr. Langley began, his voice echoing softly in the room. "As you know, it was the source of much distress for the Harper family. We've contained it here, but it still exudes a powerful presence." I approached the mirror cautiously, my reflection staring back at me with an intensity that felt almost accusing. The air around it seemed colder, the shadows deeper. I could feel a pull, a magnetic force drawing me closer, urging me to look deeper into the glass. "Have you ever experienced anything unusual with this mirror?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Langley shook his head. "Our investigations have confirmed its ability to manifest and amplify negative energies. It's not just a mirror. It's a gateway for restless spirits." I stared into the mirror, my mind racing with the possibilities. Suddenly, the reflection began to warp, the edges of my image blurring as if the glass were a portal to another dimension. The room around me faded, replaced by the image of a quaint suburban home, the Harper's house, seemingly frozen in time. I watched as the scene unfolded. A family gathered around the dinner table, laughter and warmth filling the air. Emily Harper, her eyes wide with innocence, sat quietly, staring into the same mirror that now reflected my presence. The atmosphere was idyllic, a stark contrast to the horror that would soon consume their lives. Without warning, the scene shifted, the room darkened, the laughter turning to cries of anguish. Objects began to move violently, crashing against the walls, breaking under invisible forces. Emily stood up, her face contorted in fear, her eyes now hollow and empty. She reached out towards the mirror, her voice trembling. "Help us!" The reflection flickered, and the image of Emily vanished, replaced by a dark, swirling vortex within the mirror. Shadows coalesced into the shape of a man, his expression twisted with rage and sorrow. He stepped out of the mirror, his form shifting and unstable, as if he were being torn between worlds. I recoiled, heart pounding. As the apparition moved towards me, the room seemed to shrink, the air thick with an oppressive weight. I could hear the faint whispers of the Harper family, their voices merging into a haunting chorus that filled my mind with despair. "Release us, end our suffering," the voices echoed, their pleas resonating through the glass. Desperate to break free, I turned away from the mirror, but the pull was too strong. My reflection reached out, fingers elongating into claws that scraped against my skin. Panic surged through me as I tried to pull away, but the connection was unbreakable, the mirror holding me captive in its spectral grip. "You cannot escape," the shadowy man declared, his voice a deep, resonant growl. "We are bound to this mirror, to this place." Summoning every ounce of courage, I forced my gaze back to the mirror, locking eyes with the apparition. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling but resolute. The man's form began to distort, his features blurring as he struggled to maintain his shape. "We seek closure," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Unresolved pain, unfulfilled lives. Until our stories are told, our spirits remain trapped, forever haunting this mirror." I realized then that the key to freeing the Harpers, and perhaps myself, was to uncover and share their story. But the effort to escape was taking its toll, my strength waning as the mirror drained my energy. The room grew colder, the whispers intensifying, filling my mind with visions of the Harpers' suffering. With a final surge of determination, I broke free from the mirror's grasp, stumbling back into the room, gasping for breath. The mirror stood silent once more, the reflection now normal, my image staring back at me in the glass. Mr. Langley rushed to my side, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" he asked, helping me to steady myself. I nodded, though my body felt weak and my mind reeling from the encounter. "We need to tell their story," I said, my voice firm despite the lingering fear. "Their suffering cannot be forgotten. It's the only way to set them free." Mr. Langley nodded solemnly. "That's why we have this exhibit, to honor their memory and ensure their voices are heard." Determined to honor the Harpers and aid in their release, I spent the next few weeks delving into their history. I interviewed relatives, friends, and anyone who had known them, piecing together the events that led to their tragic end. The Harpers had been a loving family, but beneath the surface, secrets and unresolved tensions festered, ultimately leading to their downfall. As I compiled my findings, I realized that the mirror had not only trapped their spirits, but also amplified their unresolved emotions, creating a vortex of negative energy that fueled the hauntings. It was a cycle of pain that needed to be broken, a narrative that had to be told to bring peace to the restless souls. I returned to the Warrens Museum, my heart heavy with the weight of their story. Mr. Langley welcomed me, a knowing look in his eyes. "Are you ready to present their story?" he asked. I nodded, taking a deep breath as I stood before the mirror once more. "I've gathered all the information. It's time to share their truth." Together, we organized a memorial event, inviting locals and those who had experienced the mirror's hauntings to honor the Harpers. We shared their stories, the trials they faced, and the unresolved pain that had bound their spirits to the mirror. As the final words were spoken, the atmosphere in the room shifted, the oppressive energy lifting as if a great weight had been removed. The mirror seemed to glow with a soft, ethereal light, the reflections now peaceful and serene. The whispers faded, replaced by a gentle silence that spoke of closure and release. I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me, knowing that the Harpers had finally found the peace they so desperately sought. As I left the museum that night, the air felt lighter, the shadows less menacing, The mirror stood as a testament to the power of truth and the importance of remembering those who had been lost. But even as I drove away, a lingering sense of serenity remained, a reminder that some stories, once told, can finally find their resolution. And sometimes, when the night is still and the moon casts a gentle glow through the museum's windows, I can still feel the presence of the Harpers, their spirits at peace, their stories forever etched into the fabric of the mirror. Because in the heart of darkness, where shadows linger and whispers echo through the glass, there are tales waiting to be heard, souls yearning for redemption, and a truth that demands to be revealed. Story number 7. Whispers of Annabelle. I've always been fascinated by the macabre, drawn to stories that linger in the shadows and refuse to be forgotten. When I first heard about Annabelle, a seemingly ordinary doll with a sinister reputation, my curiosity was piqued. The tale was simple yet chilling, an old toy given to a young girl. But soon after, strange and terrifying events began to unfold. Determined to delve deeper into the mystery, I decided to visit the house where Annabelle was first reported to have caused chaos. The house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its Victorian architecture both charming and eerie under the pale moonlight. As I approached, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped the surroundings. The front door creaked open before I even knocked, as if inviting me inside. Heart pounding, I stepped into the dimly lit foyer, the scent of old wood and something else, something acrid, filling my nostrils. My guide through this haunted history was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had witnessed the doll's dark transformation firsthand. Her eyes, once bright and welcoming, now held a haunted look that spoke of sleepless nights and unending fear. "Annabelle wasn't always like this," she began, her voice trembling. "She was just a beautiful porcelain doll, a gift for my daughter, Emily." But then the nightmares started. She led me to Emily's old bedroom, now frozen in time. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, and the furniture was covered in white sheets. In the corner stood Annabelle, her glassy eyes staring blankly ahead, a permanent smile etched on her porcelain face. Despite her beauty, there was an undeniable sense of malevolence that seemed to emanate from her. "I remember the first incident," Mrs. Thompson continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was a stormy night, the kind that rattles your bones and makes you question your sanity. Emily was screaming, her small body writhing in terror. When I rushed in, Annabelle was sitting on the bed, her eyes moving on their own, watching Emily with an intensity that was unnatural. I felt a chill run down my spine as she spoke. The room seemed to grow colder, and the shadows danced unnaturally on the walls. Mrs. Thompson explained how the disturbances escalated over time, objects moving on their own, whispers echoing through the halls, and an overwhelming sense of dread that consumed the household. Despite numerous attempts to rid the house of Annabelle, the doll remained, her presence growing stronger and more sinister with each passing day. Determined to uncover the ultimate truth, I decided to spend the night in Emily's old bedroom. Armed with my camera, voice recorder, and a notebook, I set up my equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal activity. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. The air was heavy, and the temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the dim light. Hours passed in restless silence until a faint sound broke the stillness. A soft giggle that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. My heart raced as I scanned the room, my flashlight beam landing on Annabelle. Her eyes seemed to gleam in the darkness, and her smile widened unnaturally. "Hello," a voice whispered, barely audible but unmistakably female. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but curiosity held me in place. I reached out to Annabelle, my fingers trembling, but as soon as I touched her, a surge of cold energy shot through me, knocking me back. The room erupted into chaos, furniture overturned, books flying off shelves, and the whispers growing louder, more insistent, shadows twisted and contorted. taking on grotesque forms that danced around me. Desperate to escape, I stumbled towards the door, but it wouldn't budge. Annabelle floated above the bed. Her eyes locked onto mine with a hypnotic intensity. "Stay," she commanded, her voice now clear and authoritative. "You belong with us." Panic set in as the room seemed to close in, the walls pulsating with dark energy. I grabbed my recorder, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. "Join us." The voice echoed, and the shadows surged forward, their whispers forming a haunting chorus. Images flashed before my eyes. Emily's terrified face, her screams piercing the night, and countless others lost to Annabelle's curse. I realized then that Annabelle was more than just a haunted doll. She was a vessel for restless spirits, trapped and seeking release through fear and despair. Summoning every ounce of courage, I decided to confront the evil that had taken hold of this house. "I won't let you harm anyone else," I declared, standing my ground despite the terror gripping my heart. Annabelle's smile faltered for a moment, and the shadows recoiled. "You can't stop us," she hissed, her voice filled with malice. "We are eternal." But I refused to back down. Remembering the stories I had read about banishing haunted objects, I began to recite a prayer I had memorized, focusing all my energy on purging the darkness. The room trembled, the shadows screaming in agony as the light from my flashlight grew brighter, cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Annabelle let out a blood-curdling scream, her form flickering and distorting. The spirits surrounding me wailed, their presence weakening as the light intensified. With a final, desperate effort, I shouted the last lines of the prayer, and a blinding flash of light enveloped the room. When my vision cleared, the chaos had ceased. Annabelle lay motionless on the bed, her glassy eyes staring lifelessly ahead. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a serene calm that seemed to breathe life back into the old house. Exhausted but victorious, I collapsed onto the floor, the weight of what had transpired settling in. In the days that followed, the house returned to its former state of quiet solitude. Mrs. Thompson and her family were able to reclaim their lives, free from the torment that had plagued them for so long. Annabelle was locked away, her malevolent presence contained, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk within even the most innocent of objects. Reflecting on the experience, I realized that some mysteries are best left unexplored, and some darkness too deep to confront. But the ultimate truth is that hope and courage can triumph over even the most sinister of forces, bringing light to the darkest of places. And sometimes, when I pass by that old house, I can still feel a lingering chill and hear faint whispers carried by the wind. A haunting reminder of the night I faced the evil within Annabelle and emerged victorious. Because in the battle between light and darkness, it's the courage to confront our fears that ultimately defines us.